In the autumn of 1823, the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, saw 17 unexplained deaths in just 3 months. The troubling part wasn't just the number, but that each victim had been prepared for burial by the same family-owned funeral home, the Hartwell Funeral Parlor. The Hartwells had served the community for over 20 years, known for their meticulous care of the dead and compassion for grieving families. But when a traveling physician noticed strange marks on several bodies during a routine inspection, he uncovered a shocking secret. What authorities found in the basement of the Hartwell home was so horrifying that local officials buried the records for nearly a century. Some say the full truth was never revealed. In 1823, Millbrook was a quiet farming town with fewer than 300 residents, isolated from the major cities of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. The Hartwells had arrived in 1801, establishing the town's first funeral parlor in a large stone house on the outskirts of town. Initially met with suspicion, Ezekiel Hartwell's respectful approach soon won over the community. He and his wife Martha raised their 3 children, Josiah, Caleb, and Rebecca and Martha's elderly father, Thomas Creed, in the funeral home. The Hartwells were active in the community, attending church and helping neighbors in need. Ezekiel's eldest son, Josiah, 26, was being trained to take over the business, while Caleb, 23, assisted with carpentry and grave digging. Rebecca, 19, helped her mother and comforted grieving families. The funeral home occupied a 3-story building with living quarters and viewing areas on the main floor, the family's bedrooms upstairs, and a basement for embalming. The property also included a barn for coffin construction and a small cemetery for those who couldn't afford burial elsewhere. The Hartwells were trusted for their willingness to serve families regardless of their ability to pay. During harsh winters when crops failed, the Hartwells often traded their funeral services for food or future labor, creating a network of grateful families. By 1823, they handled nearly every death within a 15-mile radius. Meanwhile, Pennsylvania's political climate was marked by tensions between rural values and industrial progress. The Erie Canal was nearing completion, promising economic opportunities but threatening small-town life. Religious revival movements brought both spiritual renewal and upheaval, challenging authority. In this changing atmosphere, institutions like the Hartwell Funeral Parlor represented stability. Yet beneath this facade, something darker was emerging. The Hartwell family's work, their isolation, and the trust placed in them created opportunities few could imagine. Death had become their obsession, and the line between caring for the dead and causing it was about to be crossed. The first sign of trouble came on October 15, 1823, when Dr. Samuel Harrison, a state physician, arrived in Millbrook for his annual health inspection. His routine inspections typically involved checking water sources and burial practices. But this time something seemed off at the Hartwell Funeral Parlor. Pennsylvania law required bodies to be available for examination, a regulation put in place after several cholera outbreaks. Dr. Harrison was warmly greeted by Ezekiel and Josiah Hartwell, who showed him their modern embalming equipment and clean preparation rooms. But when Dr. Harrison requested to examine 3 bodies, the first one, that of 68-year-old Eleanina Fairchild, raised suspicion. He noticed faint bruises on her neck, consistent with strangulation, not the consumption that supposedly killed her. Josiah's explanation that the bruises were caused during the embalming process seemed plausible, but left Dr. Harrison unsettled. His suspicions grew as he examined the other 2 bodies. Marcus Webb, a 42-year-old farmer, showed small, deliberate puncture wounds on his arms and chest. Ezekiel explained that Webb had fallen on farming tools, but the wounds seemed too clean and intentional. The third body, Mary Patterson, a 26-year-old mother, had traces of arsenic around her mouth and nails. Dr. Harrison recognized it as poison commonly used in rural areas. As he documented his findings, he noticed the family's behavior shift from warmth to cold watchfulness, and Martha Hartwell appeared with a predatory look. Dr. Harrison insisted on examining the basement, where he found large glass containers filled with human organs, preserved in chemical solutions. Ezekiel claimed they were for educational purposes, but the organs looked fresh and had been cut with surgical precision, suggesting something far more sinister. Most unsettling of all was a leather-bound journal Dr. Harrison spotted partially hidden under a stack of burial clothes. Before he could inspect it further, Caleb Hartwell quickly moved to block his view, claiming it contained private family records. However, in the brief glance Dr. Harrison had, he saw detailed notes about various townspeople, health, family situations, and financial status. As the examination ended, Dr. Harrison found himself in a difficult position. His medical training indicated foul play in at least 3 deaths. But the evidence was circumstantial, and the Hartwell family was well respected in the community. As an outsider, his accusations would likely be dismissed by local authorities, who trusted the Hartwells. That evening, as Dr. Harrison prepared his report at the Millbrook Inn, he was approached by several townspeople. They spoke in hushed tones of the unusually high number of deaths, particularly how seemingly healthy individuals fell ill and died within days, and how the Hartwell family eagerly responded to news of someone's declining health. One particularly chilling account came from Sarah Peaton, whose elderly mother had died suddenly after Martha Hartwell began visiting regularly. Martha had brought homemade soup and comforted her mother during a minor joint pain episode. Within 3 days, the woman was dead, and the Hartwells had immediately offered their services free of charge. Dr. Harrison's investigation revealed a disturbing pattern that stretched back to the Hartwells' arrival in Millbrook in 1801. They had come from Western Virginia, with Ezekiel claiming to have learned the funeral trade from an uncle in Richmond. The Hartwells purchased their property using gold coins that seemed unusually abundant for a family of modest means. Their first winter in Millbrook was marked by an outbreak of a wasting sickness that claimed 8 lives each, prepared for burial by the Hartwell funeral parlor. Over the years, townspeople occasionally noted peculiarities surrounding deaths when the Hartwells were involved. Loved ones seemed to decline rapidly once the Hartwells became involved, and they discouraged second medical opinions or delays in burial. In a trusting community, such suspicions were easily dismissed as natural grief-related doubts. However, Dr. Harrison uncovered a far darker truth hidden in the basement of the Hartwell establishment. Behind a false wall, he found what could only be described as a laboratory of death. Shelves lined with poisoned surgical instruments far more advanced than needed for embalming, and anatomical drawings indicated experiments far beyond normal funeral practices. The most damning discovery was the full version of the journal Dr. Harrison had glimpsed earlier. This leather-bound book contained meticulous records of every person who died in the Hartwells' care, along with detailed observations on the effectiveness of various methods and substances. Written over several years, the journal revealed a chilling systematic approach to murder, carefully refined through practice and observation. The journal not only documented the methods of killing, but also the careful selection of victims. The Hartwells had become experts at identifying individuals whose deaths would be mourned but not heavily investigated, elderly people with few relatives, those with existing health problems, or those who had fallen on hard times. They also spaced out their killings, ensuring that no patterns would be noticed by the casual observer. One particularly chilling entry, written in Josiah's precise hand, detailed the murder of Marcus Webb. Webb, a widower with no close family, and a farm next to the Hartwell property, was an ideal target. He had been lured to the funeral home under the guise of discussing a coffin for a deceased neighbor. Once there, he was overpowered, subjected to what the journal called experimental procedures. and then staged to appear as though he had died of a heart attack. The family's motivations seemed to stem from a mixture of financial gain, psychological satisfaction, and a morbid fascination with death. They regularly robbed their victims of money and valuables, but this was secondary to their experiments with causing and observing death. Several entries discuss the use of various poisons, how individuals reacted to fear and pain, and their attempts to perfect methods that would leave no obvious evidence of foul play. Martha Hartwell, in particular, emerged as the most cunning member of the family. Her approach involved befriending vulnerable community members, gaining their trust, and then poisoning food or drink she prepared for them. Her reputation for kindness and matronly care made her the perfect predator, able to approach victims without raising suspicion. As the children grew, they too became involved. Rebecca, despite her youth, had developed an eye for identifying potential victims during social gatherings. Both of the sons became skilled at overpowering victims and staging crime scenes to avoid detection. What made the Hartwells particularly terrifying was their integration into the fabric of the community. They attended church, participated in town meetings, and maintained friendships with the very people they were systematically murdering. This dual existence suggested either psychopathy or a descent into madness that consumed the entire family. By the autumn of 1823, their activities had escalated, fueled by both opportunity and growing confidence. The harsh winter of the previous year had left many families financially vulnerable, and the Hartwells offered their assistance, gaining more trust and access to potential victims. Their success in evading detection had emboldened them, leading to an accelerated timeline that finally caught Dr. Harrison's attention. Now, Dr. Harrison faced a dilemma that would test his professional integrity and personal courage. His medical examination had uncovered clear evidence of foul play. However, presenting his findings to local authorities meant accusing a respected family of systematic murder, an allegation that would be met with disbelief in a community that had trusted the Hartwells for over 2 decades. Dr. Harrison was scheduled to continue his inspection tour of neighboring townships in just a few days, and delaying his departure would raise questions he wasn't prepared to answer. The solution came unexpectedly. On the second evening of his stay in Millbrook, Thomas Creed, Martha Hartwell's elderly father, requested a private consultation. Creed claimed to be suffering from severe stomach pains and asked to be examined away from the funeral home. They met in the stable behind the inn, and as soon as Creed spoke, his feeble, patient demeanor shifted to something far more calculating. Dr. Creed whispered, eyes darting nervously. "I know what you found today. The marks, the poison, the wounds that don't match the claimed causes of death. You're right to be suspicious, but you don't understand the full extent of what's happening in that house." What Thomas Creed revealed to Dr. Harrison over the next hour painted a picture far darker than the physician could have imagined. Creed explained that he had been poisoned by his own family over the past several months, suffering the same symptoms that had preceded the deaths of several recent victims. His declining health had made him an ideal test subject, but his survival instincts and knowledge of the family's methods had allowed him to survive. Creed explained how the family's criminal activities had begun with simple grave robbing. Shortly after their arrival in Millbrook, Ezekiel Hartwell had discovered that freshly buried bodies could be exhumed and stripped of valuables like jewelry and gold teeth, which could be sold in distant markets. This led to increasingly bold actions, and the family soon realized they could profit more by creating their own supply of bodies. The turning point came in 1807, when they accidentally caused the death of a gravely ill man they were attempting to rob. Instead of being exposed, they covered up the crime, and the community accepted the man's death as a natural progression of his illness. This success pushed the family to experiment more with murder, with each member specializing in different aspects of the operation. Creed went on to describe the basement laboratory, where records of over 40 murders had been kept. The victims were carefully chosen from throughout the region, isolated individuals or travelers whose disappearances would not be immediately investigated. The family had developed a network in neighboring towns to alert them to potential targets. Creed's testimony was further bolstered by his detailed knowledge of the recent victims Dr. Harrison had examined. He described how Eleanina Fairchild had been strangled, how Marcus Webb had been tortured before his death, and how Mary Patterson had been slowly poisoned by Martha, all while pretending to nurse her through a fictional illness. Most horrifying of all was Creed's revelation of a mass grave in the woods behind the Hartwell property, where the family disposed of victims whose deaths couldn't be passed off as natural. The grave contained at least a dozen bodies, including several travelers who had disappeared after seeking directions or shelter at the funeral home. Creed's motivation for betraying his family was both personal and practical. He had grown increasingly horrified by their actions, but more urgently, he realized his own death was imminent. The family had grown tired of supporting him, and recent conversations had made it clear that his usefulness as a test subject was nearing its end. Creed's only hope for survival was to expose the family's crimes and seek protection from the authorities. He proposed a plan that would allow Dr. Harrison to gather irrefutable evidence while ensuring their safety. Creed would give the physician the key to the basement laboratory, allowing him to examine the hidden records and evidence during the family's absence at Sunday church services. This would give Dr. Harrison the documentation needed to convince the authorities, while Creed would use the same opportunity to escape to a relative's home in Philadelphia. Dr. Harrison spent the remainder of the night wrestling with the implications of Creed's revelations. The crimes were staggering dozens of murders committed over nearly 2 decades by a family trusted by the entire community. The evidence Creed promised would likely be enough to secure convictions, but it would also shatter the town's sense of security. Even more troubling was the realization that Dr. Harrison himself was now in danger. His examination of the bodies had raised the family's suspicions, and his continued presence in Millbrook threatened their operation. Creed warned that the Hartwells had killed to protect their secrets before, and they would not hesitate to do so again if cornered. The plan required precise timing and courage. Dr. Harrison would need to access the basement laboratory, document the evidence, and escape before the Hartwells discovered what had happened. Creed would disappear, making it appear that he had wandered off in his senile confusion, an unfortunate but not immediately suspicious event. Sunday morning dawned cold and gray, with a November chill settling over Millbrook as residents prepared for worship. Dr. Harrison spent the night at the inn, nervously reviewing his medical notes and grappling with the enormity of the task he had agreed to undertake. The weight of the evidence in the Hartwell basement pressed on him, knowing that his life now depended on the success of the plan. Creed had given him precise instructions for accessing the basement laboratory during the family's absence at church. As prominent members of the Methodist congregation, the Hartwells never missed services, and their social activities afterward would give Dr. Harrison about 3 hours to locate and document the evidence. The key Creed provided was small and ornate, designed to open a hidden compartment behind a stone wall in the basement, where the complete murder journal, preserved specimens, poison supplies, and anatomical drawings would be found proof of the family's crimes. More importantly, the compartment contained a map showing the location of the hidden burial ground, where many victims had been disposed of. As the church bells rang, Dr. Harrison positioned himself in the woods behind the Hartwell property, watching the family leave for church. Ezekiel in his black suit resembled a minister. Martha wore a dark blue dress with a white collar, emphasizing her matronly appearance. Josiah and Caleb flanked their parents, while Rebecca walked demurely beside her mother. What disturbed Dr. Harrison most was how normal the family appeared. They exchanged pleasantries with neighbors, smiled at children, and presented themselves as the epitome of Christian virtue. Their calm exterior masked the horrific crimes Creed had described. Dr. Harrison waited a full 30 minutes after the family's departure before approaching the funeral home. The building stood silent and imposing in the weak autumn sunlight, its stone walls hiding secrets that could shatter the entire community. Dr. Harrison's hands trembled slightly as he inserted Thomas Creed's key into the basement door. Though his medical training had prepared him to face disturbing realities, he forced himself to proceed methodically. At first, the basement appeared as it had, during his official inspection, clean, organized, and professionally maintained. The embalming tables were spotless, the chemical solutions neatly labeled, and the few bodies under care lay peacefully covered by white sheets. It wasn't until Dr. Harrison began inspecting the walls more carefully that he found the concealed entrance Creed had described. Behind a section of stone that seemed indistinguishable from the rest of the basement, the small key opened a hidden panel, revealing a chamber that defied imagination. The secret room was far larger than the basement, extending beneath the entire house and into the hillside beyond. Shelves lined the walls, holding hundreds of glass jars filled with preserved human organs, each meticulously labeled with dates and what appeared to be experimental notes. In the center of the room stood a wooden lectern holding the murder journal. The leather-bound volume was thick with years of entries written in multiple hands, but all shared a chilling consistency, revealing a methodical approach to murder. Dr. Harrison's medical knowledge helped him understand the technical details, but the cold precision with which the Hartwells had documented their crimes was far more horrifying than the murders themselves. Each entry followed a chilling format victim identification method of approach killing technique reactions of the victim and notes for future reference. The journal revealed a progression from simple poisonings to increasingly sophisticated methods, suggesting years of experimentation. Recent entries showed surgical procedures performed on living victims, indicating a disturbing shift toward more invasive and brutal methods. What shocked Dr. Harrison most was the realization that the Hartwells' crimes extended far beyond Millbrook. The journal documented murders in at least 6 different Pennsylvania townships, with victims chosen during the family's travels to provide funeral services in those areas. They had developed a system for identifying vulnerable individuals, often returning months later to commit crimes where they were less likely to be suspected. The anatomical drawings were even more disturbing than the journal entries. Detailed illustrations showed various experimental procedures with notes about which techniques provoked the most fear in victims and which methods were most effective on different types of people. The drawing suggested that the Hartwells viewed their victims not as people, but as subjects for experimentation, approaching murder with the same clinical precision that legitimate researchers might apply to animal specimens. As Dr. Harrison continued his examination, he suddenly became aware of voices outside the building. His heart raced as he glanced at his pocket watch and realized to his alarm that he had been in the basement for over 2 hours, absorbed in documenting the evidence. The voices grew louder, and Dr. Harrison recognized Ezekiel Hartwell's distinctive cadence as the family returned from church much earlier than expected. Panic gripped him. He was trapped in the secret chamber with damning evidence of the Hartwells' crimes, and if they discovered him, they would certainly kill him. The voices grew closer, and he heard footsteps on the porch above. His only escape route through the basement door would lead him directly into their path. But remaining hidden in the chamber would only delay his discovery. Just when it seemed that Dr. Harrison's investigation might expose the truth about the Hartwell family, the situation took a deadly turn. As Dr. Harrison scrambled for an alternative escape route, the growing sounds of the Hartwell family approaching sent his pulse racing. His eyes scanned the room, and then at the far end of the secret chamber, he noticed something that hadn't caught his attention before an additional door partially concealed behind stacks of specimen jars. It appeared to lead further into the hillside, possibly offering a path to freedom rather than deeper into the nightmare he had uncovered. With the family's voices growing nearer, he knew he had no choice but to risk venturing into this unknown passage, hoping it would lead him to safety. The narrow passage behind the specimen chamber led him through a hand-carved tunnel that extended deep into the hillside, its rough stone walls showing signs of gradual expansion over time. The dim light of a candle he found in the chamber cast flickering shadows on the walls, and as Dr. Harrison moved cautiously through the tunnel, a horrifying realization began to dawn on him. The true scope of the Hartwell family's operation was far greater than he had imagined. The tunnel opened into a natural cave, one that had been converted into what could only be described as a charnel house. Human remains were scattered across the cavern, some meticulously arranged on stone shelves, others haphazardly piled in corners as if discarded without care. The overwhelming stench of death and decay filled the air. But Dr. Harrison's medical training allowed him to suppress his emotions and examine the scene with clinical detachment. The remains of at least 40 individuals were scattered across the cave, each showing varying degrees of decay. Some had been subjected to the same experimental procedures documented in the murder journal, while others appeared to have been killed quickly and efficiently. Personal effects, jewelry, clothing, coins littered the cave, confirming that robbery was a significant motivator for many of the murders. But what disturbed Dr. Harrison most was the section of the cave where recent victims had been displayed almost as trophies. Among the remains, he recognized clothing and jewelry from individuals he had examined during his official inspection, confirming that the Hartwells had been systematically murdering their clients instead of simply preparing their bodies for burial. The way the bodies were arranged suggested that the family visited this underground chamber regularly, possibly to relive their crimes or continue their grotesque experiments. Dr. Harrison knew he had to document this, but as he was doing so, he heard voices echoing through the tunnel behind him. The Hartwells had discovered his absence from the inn and had likely found evidence of his intrusion into their secret chamber. The voices grew closer, and it became clear that they were no longer concerned about his well-being. Their tone was patient and predatory, like hunters tracking their prey. In a panic, Dr. Harrison searched the cave for an escape. He found a narrow opening that led up to the wooded hillside above the Hartwell property. From this vantage point, he could see the family scouring the area around their home, moving with practiced efficiency, as if they had done this many times before. It was clear that Dr. Harrison was not the first to stumble upon their dark secret, and the methodical way they searched suggested that previous investigators had never survived their discoveries. Now Dr. Harrison's only hope was to escape Millbrook before the Hartwells could silence him. Using his wilderness survival knowledge and a great deal of luck, he made his way cross-country, avoiding roads where the family might be searching for him. His medical bag, heavy with documentation, would be enough to convince the authorities once he reached civilization. But he had to reach safety before the Hartwells could catch up. What Dr. Harrison didn't know was that Thomas Creed had not escaped as planned. The old man had been discovered attempting to leave the house and confronted by his family about his betrayal. Under torture, Creed had revealed everything about his arrangement with Dr. Harrison, including the physician's plans to expose their crimes. This revelation prompted the Hartwells to return early from church and begin searching for Dr. Harrison. Even more ominously, it convinced them that their operation in Millbrook was no longer safe. Rather than simply eliminate Dr. Harrison and continue their crimes, the family had decided to abandon their established base in Millbrook and relocate to a new community where they could start fresh. Their departure was as carefully planned as their crimes had been, and they would stop at nothing to ensure that their dark legacy remained hidden. The Hartwells' departure from Millbrook was executed with chilling precision. They claimed Ezekiel had received an urgent message about a dying relative in Ohio, necessitating an immediate journey that might keep them away for several months. The funeral home would be temporarily closed, and they requested that neighbors watch over the property during their absence. To most of the townspeople, this seemed like a reasonable family emergency that required their sympathy and support. What the community didn't realize was that the Hartwells were methodically destroying evidence of their crimes before leaving. The secret chamber was emptied, and sealed the cave system partially collapsed to hide the remains it contained, and all documentary evidence was either destroyed or packed for transport to their new location. By the time Dr. Harrison reached Philadelphia, authorities 3 days later, the Hartwell family had vanished completely, leaving only an empty funeral home and a community that would never suspect the horrors that had occurred in their midst. Dr. Harrison's account was met with skepticism by the authorities in Philadelphia. They found it difficult to believe that a respected family could have committed such extensive crimes without detection. Although his evidence was compelling, much of it had been destroyed or hidden by the time investigators arrived in Millbrook. The few remains recovered from the collapsed cave were insufficient to support the full scope of Dr. Harrison's accusations. The investigation was further hindered by the community's resistance to accepting the Hartwell's guilt. Townspeople provided character references for the family, insisting that they had been generous, caring neighbors who could never have committed such crimes. Without the family present for questioning, and with most of the physical evidence destroyed, authorities concluded that while suspicious circumstances existed, there was insufficient proof to justify a massive manhunt. Thomas Creed's disappearance was explained as the wandering of a senile old man who had become confused and lost in the woods. Search parties found no trace of him, and his fate remained officially unknown, though Dr. Harrison was certain that Creed had paid the ultimate price for trying to expose his family's crimes. The aftermath of Dr. Harrison's discoveries haunted both him and the community of Millbrook for years. Though the physician submitted detailed reports to state authorities, the case was eventually classified as inconclusive and filed away in the growing bureaucracy of the Pennsylvania state government. Dr. Harrison never stopped believing in what he had witnessed. He spent personal resources attempting to track down the Hartwells, and his investigations revealed a pattern of similar disappearances and suspicious deaths in Ohio during 1824 and 1825. By the time he could alert authorities, the family had already vanished again. Over the following decade, Dr. Harrison documented similar patterns in Indiana, Illinois, and the Missouri Territory, always arriving too late to prevent further murders or capture the perpetrators. The people of Millbrook were left to grapple with the unsettling possibility that they had been living alongside systematic murderers for over 2 decades. Some residents refused to believe Dr. Harrison's account, insisting that the Hartwells had been good neighbors who were being falsely accused. Others began re-examining past deaths with newfound suspicion, questioning how many of their loved ones had actually been murdered, rather than dying of natural causes. The Hartwell funeral parlor building stood empty for nearly 2 years before being purchased by a merchant from Philadelphia who converted it into a general store. Local residents, however, were reluctant to enter the building. It took years for the community to fully accept its new function. The basement remained permanently sealed, and no one showed interest in exploring the cave system that Dr. Harrison had described. Perhaps most tragically, the fear and suspicion created by the Hartwell affair fundamentally changed Millbrook's character. The trust and openness that had once defined the community were replaced by weariness and doubt. Neighbors began viewing each other with suspicion. Death, once a natural part of life, became a source of fear. And the simple faith that had once bound the community together was permanently fractured. Dr. Harrison continued his work as a traveling physician, but he was forever changed by what he had witnessed in Millbrook. He became obsessively meticulous during his inspections, examining every death with the thoroughness of a criminal investigator. rather than a routine health official. His colleagues began to view him as eccentric, even paranoid. But Dr. Harrison knew the truth evil could hide behind the most respectable facades. In 1847, nearly 24 years after his experience in Millbrook, Dr. Harrison received a letter that would vindicate his long-held beliefs and provide a final, chilling chapter to the Hartwell story. The letter arrived from a sheriff in Oregon Territory, where westward expansion had led thousands of settlers to seek new opportunities on the American frontier. According to the sheriff's account, a family named Caldwell had operated a funeral parlor in a small Oregon settlement for 3 years before being exposed in circumstances eerily similar to what Dr. Harrison had uncovered in Pennsylvania. The sheriff, having read Dr. Harrison's old reports and federal files, recognized the identical patterns of suspicious deaths, systematic poisoning, and hidden burial sites. When authorities raided the Caldwell establishment, they found evidence of at least 30 murders committed during their 3 years in Oregon. More significantly, they discovered that the Caldwells were actually the Hartwell family who had been moving westward across America for over 2 decades, establishing new identities and continuing their murderous practices in each new community. The family had been captured alive, and during interrogation, they confessed to crimes spanning nearly 30 years and covering 8 different states. Their total victim count exceeded 120 individuals, making them some of the most prolific serial killers in American history. Ezekiel Hartwell, now calling himself Ezekiel Caldwell, was 73 years old but remained mentally sharp and showed no remorse. Martha, Josiah, Caleb, and Rebecca had continued their roles in the family operation, refining their techniques and expanding their methods with each relocation. Their confessions provided closure for dozens of unsolved disappearances across the frontier. And chillingly, they expressed pride in their accomplishments, viewing themselves as successful entrepreneurs in a particularly grisly line of business. Ezekiel Hartwell was executed by hanging in Salem, Oregon in December 1847, followed by his wife Martha and son Josiah. Caleb was sentenced to life imprisonment, where he died of pneumonia in 1852. Rebecca, who was still relatively young and claimed to have been coerced by her family, received a 20-year sentence but died in prison of unknown causes in 1851. The revelation of the Hartwell family's crimes sent shockwaves through the communities they had infiltrated. Families who had trusted them during their most vulnerable moments realized they had been in the presence of calculating murderers. The case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of placing blind trust in strangers, no matter how respectable they appeared. Now in his 70s, Dr. Harrison traveled to Oregon to witness Ezekiel Hartwell's execution and confront the man who had haunted his thoughts for over 2 decades. Before the execution, the 2 men spoke briefly, and Hartwell expressed surprise that Dr. Harrison had survived his discovery in Millbrook, noting that several other investigators over the years had not been so fortunate. In their final conversation, Hartwell revealed one last disturbing detail. The family had trained other individuals in their methods, apprentices who had established their own operations across the expanding nation. Hartwell claimed that at least 3 other families were continuing similar practices, but he refused to provide any details to help authorities locate them. This revelation ensured that Dr. Harrison's remaining years would be spent knowing that the evil he had uncovered in Millbrook was still spreading across America. The community of Millbrook never fully recovered from the knowledge that their trusted neighbors were systematic murderers. Over time, the town gradually declined as families moved away, unable to bear the weight of their shared history. By 1860, Millbrook had been abandoned entirely, and the forest began to reclaim the buildings where so much horror had been hidden. Today, few records remain of the Hartwell family's crimes. The official reports are buried in government archives, the newspaper accounts forgotten, and the communities they terrorized tried to erase all memory of their presence. But for those who study the darker chapters of American history, the Hartwell case serves as a haunting reminder that evil can flourish anywhere hidden, behind masks of respectability and protected by the very trust and innocence it seeks to destroy. The story of the Hartwell funeral parlor illustrates how serial killers could operate with impunity in an era before modern communication and law enforcement coordination. It shows how predators exploited the natural human trust that bound communities together, using it as a weapon against their victims. Most importantly, it reveals how ordinary people, doctors, neighbors, family members, sometimes hold the power to expose great evils, but only if they are willing to look beyond appearances and act on their suspicions. Dr. Harrison spent his final years documenting everything he had uncovered about the Hartwell case, hoping that his records might one day help other investigators recognize similar patterns of crime. He passed away in 1853, taking with him intimate knowledge of one of America's most horrifying family criminal enterprises. His detailed notes were discovered among his personal papers and eventually found their way into federal archives, where they remain as a chilling testament to crimes that shocked even the investigators who uncovered them. The legacy of the Hartwell family extends far beyond their immediate victims, influencing the fundamental changes they brought to every community they touched. They destroyed the sense of security that had once allowed small towns to function as extended families, replacing trust with suspicion and innocence with weariness. In this way, their impact on American society stretched far beyond the individuals they murdered, touching the very fabric of community life in the expanding nation. This mystery reveals how easily evil can disguise itself as respectability, and how the very institutions we turn to for comfort during our darkest moments can sometimes harbor our worst nightmares. The story of the Hartwell family challenges us to question the people and systems we trust, reminding us that appearances can be deceiving and danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed about the Hartwell family's crimes? Or could there have been even darker secrets that died with them? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Have you heard similar stories from your own region's history? If you enjoyed this tale and want more historical horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves dark mysteries. The past holds many secrets, and we'll continue exploring them together. See you in the next video. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.